What if the rain never stopped? Imagine the prairie stretching endlessly under a gray, trembling sky. A world where water runs through every footprint, where the air itself tastes of wet bark and smoke. For most people today, a storm like that would mean retreat, finding a roof, sealing a window, waiting it out. But centuries ago, when the sky opened for days, Indigenous peoples of North America didn't panic. They adapted, not with membranes, zippers, or waterproof coatings, but with knowledge older than the thunder itself. Here's the catch. Their survival wasn't about fighting the rain. It was about working with it. Every drop that fell was a teacher. Every storm, a lesson in balance. These were not people trapped by the weather. They were engineers of nature's rhythm. While settlers struggled to keep their cabins dry, native families stayed warm and steady inside homes made of hides, bark, and reeds. No metal, no nails, no plastic. Yet somehow, dry fires still burned, blankets stayed warm, and spirits didn't fade. Picture this: a tipi standing tall in the middle of a storm. The wind screams across the plains, slashing sideways sheets of rain. You'd expect chaos, leaks, smoke, a soaked floor. But inside, a calm orange glow flickers across smiling faces. The air is fresh, not smoky. The ground is dry. The fire burns clean. How? It's not magic. It's design, perfected by centuries of observation. The first settlers who saw these shelters couldn't believe it. How could a tent made from animal hides stay dry when their log cabins were turning into swamps? The answer lay in principles modern architects still struggle to imitate: aerodynamics, airflow, and natural materials that breathe with the environment instead of resisting it. The tipi, the wigwam, the longhouse, each was not just a house, but a living system, self-ventilating, self-draining, self-heating. Here's the weird part. The wetter it got, the better some of these systems worked. Cattail mats that tightened under moisture, birch bark that turned slick and impermeable, hides that sealed themselves after smoke treatment. Nature's own smart fabrics, centuries before Gore-Tex or DWR coating ever existed. The genius wasn't hidden in chemicals. It was in understanding behavior of rain, wind, and material. Now think about this. You're a traveler, walking between camps under pouring rain. Your cloak isn't nylon. It's fur, turned outward, feathers layered like scales, shedding water with every movement. You arrive at camp, shake off the storm, and feed a fire that not only warms you, but dries your gear in minutes. All without choking the air with smoke. The knowledge behind that moment wasn't written in books. It was lived, tested, passed down by firelight. Modern life has made us forget something simple. Dryness isn't about staying away from rain. It's about knowing how to live with it. Indigenous peoples mastered that truth. To them, the storm wasn't an enemy. It was a partner in survival. So, when the next heavy rain falls, imagine standing beneath it, not as a victim, but as a student. Because the people who lived here long before modern roofs and raincoats already solved the problem, elegantly, sustainably, and with wisdom we're only beginning to rediscover. And that's where our journey begins, deep inside the storm itself, where the first secret of staying dry lies not in what they built, but in how they thought. The storm, in their eyes, wasn't chaos. It was rhythm. Rain had a pattern, a pulse, and the people learned to breathe with it. Long before the word aerodynamics existed, the Plains tribes understood how air and water move. A tipi wasn't a random cone of poles. It was an elegant equation written in wood and hide. Its steep angles divided the wind, its circular base guided it upward, and the smoke hole at the top became the beating heart of the structure. The wind that seemed to threaten it was, in fact, what kept it alive, drawing fresh air in and pushing dampness out. Here's the smart move. The inner liner, the ozone, was more than decoration. It was science in motion. When the fire burned inside and cold rain pressed from outside, the liner caught condensation before it could fall. It channeled that moisture down to the ground, forming a hidden drainage wall. The gap between outer hide and inner skin became a thermal corridor. Cold air slipped in beneath, warmed as it rose between the two layers, and escaped through the smoke flaps, pulling with it the damp, stale air. What modern HVAC systems do with steel and electricity, they achieved with hide, gravity, and breath. Records suggest that this design maintained a steady interior microclimate, dry, warm, and oxygen-rich, even in multi-day storms. You could sleep beside a fire without choking on smoke, and wake to a floor that stayed dry enough to sit on barefoot. The tipi wasn't just resisting rain, it was orchestrating air and moisture into harmony. Across forests and wetlands, a similar intelligence unfolded in different forms. The wigwam, the longhouse, the bark lodge, each took its shape from the weather it faced. Where rain was constant, roofs curved low and bark overlapped like scales. Where storms howled with sideways rain, entrances faced the leeward side, catching light, not water. These patterns were not guesses. They were observations repeated for generations until failure was no longer an option. The insight runs deeper than material. It's philosophy. To stay dry, you don't seal yourself off from the world. You listen to it. You let air move. Let water find its path. Let smoke rise the way it wants to. That humility before nature's physics created designs so refined that even modern architects studying sustainable housing still reference their geometry. Here's the strange thing. The same fire that could destroy a home was also the key to keeping it dry. Fire created airflow, heat, and smoke that transformed raw materials into weatherproof ones. Through the act of living, they were also engineering. Every daily task, arranging hides, adjusting flaps, tending the fire, was maintenance, climate control, and chemistry all at once. Imagine standing inside such a dwelling while rain drums above, every drop guided, every draft accounted for. The floor is cushioned with reeds that insulate and absorb. The air moves in invisible spirals, and the smoke that seems chaotic actually draws moisture away. No wasted motion, no wasted energy. Everything working in rhythm with the storm outside. What we see as primitive tents were, in truth, breathing machines. Responsive ecosystems shaped by intuition, patience, and centuries of iteration. And this realization opens the next layer of their genius. If the insight was understanding how nature behaves, the tools they built from that wisdom were where the magic truly took form. When you look closely at how Indigenous people built their world, you start to see that every tool, every material, was part of a living system. There were no spare parts, no excess. Every piece of bark, every stretch of sinew, every handful of resin served a precise purpose. Rain wasn't beaten back. It was redirected, absorbed, transformed. And that transformation started with their tools. Take the teepee itself. Its strength wasn't just in its shape, but in the way each element performed double or even triple duty. The outer cover, usually made from smoked and brain-tanned hides, wasn't ordinary leather. In its raw state, hide stretches when wet and shrinks when dry, cracking and warping. But through an intricate two-stage process, the hide became something else entirely. First came brain tanning. Emulsions made from the animal's own fats and oils softened the fibers, binding them with natural lubricants. This created a supple, breathable suede that didn't stiffen after getting wet. Then came smoking, the alchemy that sealed the deal. Thick, cool smoke from punk wood infused the fibers with aldehydes and phenols that chemically cross-linked the collagen. The result was a golden brown skin that repelled water and resisted rot. Raindrops rolled off its surface like beads of mercury, while the hide itself remained soft and strong. Here's the genius. Smoke wasn't just heat or light. It was chemistry, preservation, and design rolled into one. By using smoke instead of flame, they achieved a level of material treatment we'd now call polymer stabilization, all without a single synthetic compound. But hides were only half the story. In the forested Northeast, nature offered a different kind of protection. Bark. The paper birch, rich in natural betulin wax, was a miracle of waterproofing. When peeled in large, intact sheets, birch bark became the indigenous world's version of plastic. Flexible, light, and completely water-resistant. People layered it like shingles on longhouses and canoes, using spruce roots as stitching thread. The outer white layer shed water, the inner retained warmth, and together they created roofs that could last for decades. Even today, archaeologists uncover bark fragments still intact after centuries, the waxy surface untouched by decay. Here's the catch. Birch bark wasn't glued, it was stitched. The seams were sealed not with metal nails or tar, but with pine resin. This wasn't just raw sap. The resin was melted and mixed with charcoal dust and animal fat, forming a black, pliable compound that hardened into a perfect waterproof adhesive. Charcoal added strength. Fat gave flexibility. It stayed firm in heat, soft in cold, and could even be reheated and reused. In modern terms, it was a reusable, bioplastic sealant, thousands of years before industry rediscovered the same concept. Meanwhile, across the wetlands, another marvel was unfolding. The cattail mat. Women wove long, slender leaves into thick sheets, dried them in the sun, and rolled them for transport. The magic happened when rain began to fall. As the fibers absorbed moisture, they swelled, closing microscopic gaps in the weave until the mat became watertight. The wetter it got, the tighter it sealed. A self-adjusting fabric made entirely from plants. In dry weather, it loosened again, letting air flow freely. Nature's smart textile, no electricity required. Even the seams of these structures carried hidden intelligence. Stitching wasn't random. Sinew and plant fibers were used in a pattern that swelled when wet, tightening the holes they passed through. A tipi or wigwam could literally seal itself during a downpour. Combined with resin at stress points, the result was a structure that expanded and contracted like skin, breathing, moving, alive. Then there was fire, the invisible tool binding it all together. Fire-hardened wooden pegs, dried mats, sealed resin, and smoked hides. It created the draft systems that ventilated the shelters. It even powered small-scale chemistry, melting fats, boiling saps, and sterilizing fibers. Without it, none of these tools worked. With it, they became an integrated survival system. Here's the thing. Each of these innovations didn't emerge from theory, but from thousands of experiments carried out by necessity. No laboratories, no patents, just endless cycles of observation. A mislaid bark sheet, a hide cured too long, a resin mix too brittle. All were lessons written into the next attempt. Over generations, this knowledge solidified into culture. By combining animal, plant, and mineral elements, hide, bark, resin, smoke, they built weatherproof ecosystems from what surrounded them. Modern materials still struggle to match that balance of strength, flexibility, and biodegradability. What they created wasn't gear, it was philosophy made tangible. And that philosophy shaped not just their tools, but how they lived, moved, and thought about the rain itself. Imagine the sky turning dark over the plains. The horizon blurs, and the scent of wet earth rolls in. For most people, that's a warning. For Indigenous families, it was simply time to act, not in fear, but in rhythm. The moment clouds thickened, a quiet choreography began. Each person knew their task, every motion part of a practiced sequence passed down through generations. Survival wasn't just about materials, it was about behavior. Here's the smart move. A tipi could be packed, moved, and rebuilt in under an hour. When storms approached, families didn't wait to be trapped. They shifted camp to higher ground, often to a gentle slope where water naturally drained away. Site selection was the first line of defense. Never in a hollow, never near a riverbed that could swell overnight. They read the ground like a map, watching how rain ran off, where grass bent, how soil darkened. A traveler might see an open field. An experienced scout saw a drainage system. Once the site was chosen, the setup began like clockwork. The poles were raised into a tripod, each one positioned according to memory, not measurement. The hides were unrolled and lifted, the smoke flaps facing away from the wind. The bottom edges were pegged tight with stones or wood stakes, sealing the floor from drafts and splashback. Around the interior, shallow grooves were dug, a simple but genius solution that redirected runoff into the earth instead of pooling underfoot. Inside, bedding of dried grass, reeds, or firs lifted sleepers above the cold, damp ground. You didn't lie on the earth. You floated slightly above it, insulated by layers of air and natural fiber. When the rain hit, everyone knew how to manage the tipi's breathing. The person tending the fire adjusted the smoke flaps using long poles from inside, closing them against the driving wind, but never sealing them completely. A perfect balance was maintained. Just enough opening for smoke to escape while keeping the rain at bay. Children helped reposition hides if the wind shifted. Women checked the liner to ensure droplets followed the ozon's curve down, not inward. It was constant, mindful attention, like tuning an instrument mid-storm. Here's the fascinating part. The wetter the world outside became, the more active life inside grew. Fires were fed with slow-burning wood to maintain dry heat without sparks. Overhead, drying racks suspended moccasins, cloaks, and tools. The warm draft lifting moisture upward, keeping everything crisp and ready. The fire's placement in the center wasn't arbitrary. Heat radiated evenly across the circular floor, and the rising current kept air moving in a spiral that carried humidity up and away. It was ventilation by instinct, perfected by repetition. When travel was necessary in bad weather, The same logic guided their actions. A hunter caught in sudden rain would build a quick lean-to, a single pole across two forks, covered with bark, branches, or his own hide cloak. The slanted wall always faced the storm, the open side toward the fire. The rain that hit the back rolled down harmlessly, while the heat from the fire reflected off the angled roof and warmed his body. With a bit of resin, bark, and dry grass, comfort returned within minutes. No panic, no waiting for the weather to pass. Here's the catch. Staying dry wasn't just physical. It was mental discipline. Wet gear meant heavy steps, slower movement, wasted energy. So every task revolved around prevention. Drying clothes before sleep, rotating bedding, clearing drainage trenches at dusk. After each rain, mats and hides were stretched to dry in the smoke, absorbing its preservative touch. Fires were never completely extinguished, even overnight. The embers ensured that by morning, warmth and dryness could be restored quickly. Families worked in cycles that mirrored nature. As rain replenished the earth, they renewed their shelters. As humidity rose, they turned smoke into protection. Every act, packing, drying, tending, lifting, was part of a dialogue with the weather. And because they never fought that dialogue, they rarely lost. To modern eyes, it might seem exhausting. The constant adjustment, the endless small movements. But for them, it was life in its purest form. Cooperation between human and environment. The tipi, the wigwam, the longhouse, none of them were static. They breathed with their inhabitants, and the people moved in rhythm with the rain. By understanding these behaviors, we begin to see that technology alone was never the secret. The real mastery lay in the mindset, patience, precision, and respect. And in that rhythm of motion and observation, something profound emerged. A way of living where dryness wasn't a condition, but a state of harmony. When you live this way, something remarkable happens. Comfort stops depending on control. The rain can pour for days. The air can shimmer with mist, yet life inside the shelter remains steady. That was the quiet reward of native ingenuity. Not perfection, but balance. Everything they built, every hide, mat, and groove, served a purpose that rippled far beyond keeping dry. Here's the catch. Efficiency wasn't measured by luxury, but by harmony. A tipi used only a fraction of the wood required to build a cabin, roughly 1/10, according to historical accounts. Less weight to carry, less forest to cut, less impact on the land. The result was mobility, flexibility, and sustainability before those words even existed. When storms passed and herds moved, the people moved too, leaving behind almost no trace except footprints and ash. The science was elegant. The double-walled system maintained a consistent temperature, warm in cold rain and cool in humid weather. Fires burned cleaner thanks to airflow, producing less smoke and requiring less fuel. The hides, treated with smoke and natural oils, lasted years longer than untreated leather, resisting mold, stretching, and decay. In an environment where every resource mattered, that durability was survival. The emotional benefit was just as powerful. Staying dry meant staying strong, physically and spiritually. A dry home meant warm food, healthy children, and preserved tools. Fires didn't just heat the air. They dried clothing, sterilized gear, and lifted morale. When everything outside was soaked and cold, the glowing calm inside a teepee or longhouse was a sanctuary of light and order. Here's the smart part. These systems weren't just effective, they were sustainable by design. Every material returned to the earth without harm. Resin broke down into soil. Hides decomposed naturally. Bark renewed each season. The more they learned to work with natural processes, the less they needed to take. That efficiency became a philosophy, a kind of environmental symmetry where survival and stewardship were the same thing. Even by modern ecological standards, the numbers are astonishing. Using local materials eliminated transport waste. Passive airflow reduced smoke pollution, and self-repairing materials meant no need for replacements. Their homes were not only dry, but carbon neutral, centuries before the term carbon footprint was ever imagined. And maybe that's the hidden gift. Staying dry wasn't just about protection from rain. It was about understanding one's place in the natural order. When design serves both people and planet, comfort stops being fragile. It becomes part of the landscape itself. In that sense, indigenous knowledge didn't merely solve the problem of rain, it transformed survival into sustainability, proving that the driest homes weren't sealed away from nature, but open to its wisdom. The deeper you look, the clearer it becomes. This was never just about weatherproofing. It was a worldview woven into bark, sinew, and smoke. Every structure, every habit reflected a belief older than memory, that survival meant partnership, not dominance. The rain wasn't an enemy to be conquered, it was a teacher to be understood. Here's the quiet truth. When indigenous peoples built their shelters, they were also building relationships with the elements. The tipi's breath mirrored the wind. The bark roof echoed the forest's layers. The cattail mat responded to water like the plants it came from. To live dry in a storm was to live with the storm. To recognize that safety didn't come from resistance, but from alignment. This is the philosophy that modern sustainability movements are only beginning to rediscover. Their technology carried a moral compass. Nothing was wasted, nothing taken without purpose. A hide used for covering would later become clothing or bedding. Resin was harvested carefully, leaving trees alive. Fire was never left unattended because it was considered a living being, deserving respect. Even the smoke, the invisible bridge between home and sky, was treated as a sacred presence. The more one observes, the more obvious it becomes. This was a complete science guided by reverence. Here's the paradox. Modern life has forgotten. Progress doesn't always mean adding more layers of protection. Sometimes, it means removing the ones that separate us from nature's logic. Indigenous builders knew that staying dry, warm, and alive came from listening first. Their designs were not static inventions, but evolving conversations between human intuition and natural law. Today, architects speak of bioclimatic design and passive airflow systems. Engineers study renewable materials and circular economies. Yet every one of those ideas already existed beneath the rain-soaked hides of a tipi or the bark shingles of a longhouse. What we call innovation, they called daily life. The lesson endures. To endure the storm, don't fight it, flow with it. To live sustainably, don't isolate yourself, participate. The indigenous knowledge of staying dry in heavy rain wasn't about outsmarting nature. It was about remembering we are part of it. So, the next time you hear rain on the roof, listen closely. That rhythm is ancient. It's the same song that guided generations to build, to adapt, and to thrive. Protecting ourselves from the rain isn't a battle. It's a dialogue that never ends. Preserve Indigenous wisdom. Learn from it. Because the future won't be won against nature. It will be built alongside it, drop by drop.